He's the author of his controversial book on the late tech titan John McAfee. And Mark got to know McAfee as he wrote an exhilarating and uncensored account of the maverick tech titan's wild life, a breakneck journey from Silicon Valley to his sudden mysterious death in a Barcelona prison. Huge thank you for coming on, Mark.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. I've been talking about this for a while. You've been kind of inviting me for it. It's been a couple of weeks since we first got the invite, and I'm just really happy to be here and talk about it.
Whereabouts in the world are you?
Scotland.
You're in Scotland?
The right end of the UK.
Oh, which part of Scotland?
Near St Andrews, sort of an hour from Edinburgh.
I did a talk up at St Andrews a couple of years back. That's absolutely beautiful, the coast there.
Nice town, eh?
All the history and everything, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, love to live in a place like that. All right, so do you want to just tell the viewers a little bit about you, and then we'll get to the McAfee stuff?
Yeah, I mean, my world is ghostwriting primarily, and that extends to musicians, sports people, business types, John McAfee types, just anyone really. I mean, I'm out there looking for work. I get people approaching me, and basically it's living with people for a year of their life, not literally living with them, but being with them and writing their story for them, whether it's somebody who doesn't want to, can't, doesn't have time. That's what I do. So that's my world, and I've been doing it for the last 15 years or so.
What got you interested in that?
Long story. I was in business before that. Reached a sort of crossroads. It was pretty messy. Divorce, business failure, death of a parent, etc., etc. I was always really keen on caddying, and this is a really important link because I caddied on the old course in St Andrews for a few years. And I did this at a time where I really wanted to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And I realized that 4 hours with someone on a golf course that you've never met in your life on the first tee, you're with someone, you're forced into understanding them for those 4 hours. And as I did this, I realized, wait a minute, this is a really great way of getting to know people. And as I did it over a couple of years, I suddenly thought, I'd really like to extend this into ghostwriting for people in their life stories. And, this wasn't a sort of blind sort of shot in the dark. An English teacher had said to me many years previously, you could be a good writer if you ever spent any time doing it. At the time, it wasn't sexy. It wasn't, how'd you make money doing it? So I just thought this is the time to do it. And I did, and I dived in, and here I am.
So who was your first subject?
First subject was James Hetfield, the lead singer of Metallica. And this was a book that was punted my way by a publisher. I'd never written a book. I'd done some really, really deeply naive reviews on some really obscure heavy metal websites. No idea how to write a book. They said, do you want to do it? We'll pay you 50 and 100 quid up front. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. Let's try it. I mean, and there's a message there. Figure it out. No matter what somebody offers you, if you're offered something that you think you can do, agree to it first, then figure it out. So that's what I did, and I took it from there.
And how long does a project like that take to complete?
I mean, the normal sort of from sort of conception to hitting the shelves would be 2 years. The writing part of it, 6 to 9 months. You'd spend 6 to 9 months in that kind of world. A couple more months editing. But yeah, the bulk of it you do in 6 months.
So how did you get into McAfee's world?
McAfee was, well, the previous book I did before that was with a footballer, Michael Owen. I did a book with him, came off that, loved it. It was fantastic. I was on Twitter one night, saw McAfee's posts. He followed me for some reason. I never knew why. And I followed him so I could message him, sent him a direct message and said, how about an autobiography? You've got to write an autobiography. And he came back to me and said, how much will it cost me? And I said, it'll cost you absolutely nothing at this point. And he said, okay, let's talk on Skype. And there's a story that's at the beginning of the book. And this was a really, really fun beginning. He said, I said to him, I need to see your face on Skype. John was in hiding at this point. I had no idea where he was. I said, I need to see you. I was driving back from Edinburgh with my wife in the car. All of a sudden on my phone, McAfee pops up on my Skype on my cell phone. So my wife said, you got to pull over. You have to pull over. So we pulled over off the motorway at night, sort of late afternoon on some September afternoon, and sat in a petrol station. And there was John McAfee on my phone. And he kind of tested me for a couple of days, said, are you the right guy? I don't know about you. He's really suspicious. Said, send me some of your work. I sent him the wrong thing. He kind of blew me off. Eventually, I sent him the right thing. And he said, you're the guy. I've worked with 2 other guys before. It's been a failure. They've been naive. They've been idiots. I think you're the guy. So from there, we had a good relationship. And this relationship continued until it wasn't a good relationship and he left the project.
So it seems that at times he was a very paranoid individual. What separated you from the other people he'd worked with that you weren't able to gain his trust?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of things. I think I was really honest with him up front. I gave him no bullshit whatsoever in terms of what the business side of things could be. I didn't know at that point. I said, I do not know what the market will be because you're quite radioactive. Don't know what publishers will say, but I will get the proposal done and we'll see what we can do. And he liked that. And I guess he liked my writing. I think he liked the idea that I was Scottish because he was born in the UK. So I think that appealed to him. If people didn't know that, John was born in the UK and then moved to the US. So he liked that connection. But I think the biggest thing was he was under duress. He was 74 years old. I think he really wanted to get the truth out. And I think he found the opportunity with me and he thought, let's just do it. And I was right up for it.
So was he born into wealth, or was he self-made?
Totally self-made. I mean, he was born into his father was military. Grew up reasonably sort of lower middle class. John was a genius from a very early stage. I mean, he was hustling when he was 16, doing jobs to make money, mathematical genius. When it came to going to college, he cruised through with minimal work. And when he came out of college, that collided with the kind of beginning of the computer age. And in an era where they were looking for programmers, and we're talking long before kind of DOS or any of these computer things, we're talking mainframe computers. There were hardly any people in the world that could do it. John McAfee was one of them. And from that point, he commanded vast income. People wanted him for projects. They sent him all over the world. And he started from there.
What kind of a young person was he? Because we see him in documentaries where he's toting guns, doing experiments with drugs, talking about orgies with sex workers. When did that kick in?
I mean, he was pretty wild from the beginning. He was pretty open about he loved women from an early age. He got in some scrapes. He had a really major drug trip in 1970, 71, where he was working down in St. Louis, Missouri, took some kind of acid trip, ended up driving back to at that time, his wife's house, threatening to kill her and his daughter. I mean, he completely lost track of reality at that point. But really, John didn't. The myth about McAfee is that from about 1985 onwards, when he started McAfee Associates, John quit drugs and alcohol. That he went to AA, saw some really scary stuff at AA, and quit. And from then until about 2012, when he was in Belize, when things got really crazy, John didn't do any drugs and alcohol. He was a free living guy who made a lot of money, who liked to enjoy living, but it wasn't under the influence of drugs. That was only at the end. And I think that's something he'd want put out there. I mean, because lots of people say McAfee was just into drugs. That he wasn't really.
What scary stuff deterred him for that period?
I mean, he went to AA and he met guys that, who had, under the influence of drugs, had got up in the morning and found their wife chopped up in bin bags in the garage. And he said, when you're that far sort of off the grid with drugs, it really makes you focus on your own life. And John found himself at that point. He was in the mode, and this was Silicon Valley in the early 80s. Everyone was taking speed. He was the kind of guy who was tossing all his drugs down the toilet at night and going back the next morning and trying to dig it out and all this kind of stuff. And he said it was going to end in death. And he knew it. And, at that point, he had the opportunity to have a really good business. And he thought, they just can't go hand in hand. I have to ditch one of them. So he ditched drugs.
So by the time of his death, he had numerous enemies.
Yeah.
When did he first start to make enemies, and who were they?
Yeah, Belize, where he went down to Belize to essentially have a quiet life, but John can't do quiet life. He went down there, meddled in local businesses. Where he was very white and very American. He moved into the jungle. Started meddling in the local drug business, started having young girls coming to live with him who wanted to live with him. There's another thing I want to put out there. People say, oh, McAfee dealing with young girls. They all wanted to be with him because he was giving them money, giving them jobs, etc., etc. But the locals didn't like it. And they were like, who is this gringo coming down here meddling in our business? And eventually they framed him. And that's where things got really, really crazy. And he had to flee the jungle. They trashed his house, ended up holed up in this house in the coastal resort where he was at the end. And it's there that the sort of really bad part of John's life happened.
When you say they framed him, specifically, what happened?
Well, ultimately they framed him. I skipped a step there. His next door neighbor, an American guy called Gregory Fall, was found shot dead, and John was never charged. He was never arrested for it. They questioned him about it, or wanted to, and he firmly believes, and I believe him based on our conversations, that because of his interference in the drugs and the local sort of politicians, they wanted to frame him with something and get him put away. I mean, a place like Belize, if you get put in prison, it's not like the UK or anywhere reasonably civilized. It is a tough place to get out of.
What were his relationships with the local gang members?
I think it was a quid pro quo sort of situation. I think John did things for them, and I think they did things for him. I think John understood how it all worked. And bear in mind, you're talking about numerous gangs. There was lots of different people with lots of different agendas. John, by his own admission, got mixed up in that to quite a big degree. And at one point didn't really know who he could trust and who he couldn't. To that extent, he ended up with this sort of literal militia guarding his house in Belize at the end, guys that were just standing there with shotguns, and he had a bunch of dogs. It became really a siege. And this was because he just didn't know who to trust. And that goes back to your paranoia thing. Who could be trusted? Who couldn't? John didn't know.
So how did his beef with the US government arise, and specifically the tax authorities?
Yeah, I mean, John was an anti-tax guy latterly. He paid millions of dollars of tax in the beginning of his life, obviously, because of his business. But it got to the point when he came back to the US after Belize where he just decided he wasn't going to file tax returns because he just said, I'm just not doing it anymore. I've paid enough tax. Now, lots of people do that and get away with it. Lots of people do that and don't have to flee the country. But John wasn't just doing that. John was going out on cruises. He had a yacht he was going around the country on. He was turning up in symposiums all over Europe. And he was saying, I don't pay tax, and here's how you don't have to either. That was a whole different kettle of fish, because, you know, it's one thing not doing it. If you're doing it and telling people how not to pay tax via crypto, and you've got 1 million followers on Twitter, you're a problem. Now, whether there was a true threat to John, I don't actually know, but he believed that was the threat was because of those stances he took on crypto.
Yeah, when I arrived in America, fresh out of university, my aunt took me to one side and she says, don't mess with the IRS, always pay your taxes. These are the biggest mafia.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the three-letter agencies, you know, the FBI can only operate inside the US. John knew that. The CIA operate outside the US. The IRS are somewhere in between. And yeah, they catch up with you. And if you're out there making big sort of proclamations, they're going to catch up with you. And whether they did or not, I don't know. But John certainly thought they were trying to.
So what was he worth at the peak of his wealth? And was that when he sold his company?
I didn't sell it. That's another myth. John just walked away. This was when John didn't want to be in corporate world. He didn't want to be a Branson or a Bezos or a Gates who made a lot of money and stayed in the business. He just wanted money to live. So at the point when the company was worth a lot and was floated, he just walked away completely, and obviously got the benefit of the flotation for the shares that he had. And I think it totaled 150 million, I think was the figure he told me. I reckon it was more than that, but it was around that, I would say.
So did he cash his shares in at that point?
Yeah, cashed in and just went on the spree for the next 20 years, 15 years, building houses. We're all over the place, making money on them, losing money on them, building houses in Ecuador for just because he could, never spending a single night in any of them in some occasions. And I said to him, what are you doing? This is madness. And he said, it's just like sculpture. I did it because I could. I had no interest in it whatsoever once it was built. And in fact, some places I hated, but I did it anyway. So he just wanted to live, and he had a yoga retreat where he was cruising women, and he just lived the kind of life he wanted to live. And on one level, I admire that.
What do you think his biggest mistakes were?
That's a good question. I think going on the run was a mistake. I think had he stayed in the US, I think it could have been sorted out. There was a grand jury convened. I think it could have been unraveled. I think that was a problem. I think fleeing Belize in the way that he did was probably not ideal, although at that time he had very few alternatives. But I think John was just too outspoken. One thing I did learn from John is he had total honesty on some levels. He was also the king of misinformation, so you've got that dichotomy. But on some levels, John was too honest. He was very, very honest about his own failings, and I think that probably brought him down in the end. I think he probably made himself a pretty easy target.
So was he most scared of getting apprehended by the US authorities and extradited?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, John said to me on a couple of occasions, if I get dragged back to the US, I'll disappear. He'll end up in some super prison somewhere in the Midwest and just never be heard from him again. I mean, we know there's plenty of cases of that happening. I think on one level he didn't want that, but I think on an ego level he really didn't want that. This was John McAfee. I don't get taken back to the US. I don't disappear. I think he would have thought that would be a really ignominious end for the kind of life he lived. I just thought the prospect of that wasn't something that appealed to him at all.
Did he have a nemesis? Were there specific people within the US government that he thought were out to get him?
I don't think so. I think it was and I think that's always the problem with John. There was always this sort of vague threat. And I used to try and pin him down, and he gave me some quite good stories about sort of particular parts of the CIA who were helping him, other parts of the CIA who weren't. It was all this, it was a little bit smoke and mirrors, and that was the McAfee way. And when I tried to sort of pin him down on specifics about that, it was always just this sort of looming threat, which again goes back to your suggestion about paranoia. Was there a threat at all? Only John really knows.
Could you run down his course then from Belize to Spain?
Oh yeah, Belize to Spain was bizarre. He ended up in the US in 2012, and for the next 7 years, basically, him and his wife Janice, who's out there and a friend of mine, Janice is a great woman, who he met the day he came back. They basically ran around the US in various stages of what seemed to be paranoia, running away from people who were shooting at them from freeways, people who were hiding in the loft of their house. John hid in a dumpster in Portland to escape people who were trying to apprehend him from Belize, he said. He claimed cartel members were chasing him. The list went on, to the extent that at one point John was blasting holes in his own house from the inside, to the extent he had to stuff towels in the holes because the house was leaking water. I mean, crazy stuff. Lying in bed with one eye open and the other a finger on a shotgun. It really got really paranoid, to the extent that when the grand jury was convened in 2019, he got on a yacht and left. From there, very quick sort of whistle-stop tour to the Bahamas, where he got in trouble. The CIA tried to pick him up there. That is a fact. He then went to Cuba, fell out with Cuba, went to the Dominican Republic, where they basically arrested him for an arms charge, extradited to the UK, his country of birth, and then disappeared for a while. And then that's where I caught up with him, because I didn't know where he was when I was talking to him. He never told me, although he did say at one point, and this was quite funny, he said, "You'll need to come and see me." And I said, "Oh yeah, how's that going to work?" And he said, "You will turn up at an airport, you will have a newspaper under your left arm, a man will approach with an umbrella, he will hand you an airline ticket, and you will board that flight." And I mean, it's literally James Bond stuff. And I said, "Okay, I'll believe that when it happens." It never happened. But throughout all the conversations, he never told me where he was. I never asked. It was only after he died I found out he was in Spain.
Why wouldn't the Cubans harbor him?
I don't know. Apparently, he told me there was some story going on about US warships in the sort of local waters or something, and that he was used as a bargaining tool. He claims this was the case. I don't think it was. I just think they thought he was toxic like everybody else did. They just didn't want this guy who was out there on this yacht with tons of guns in their jurisdiction. So I think they just moved him on. And the same in the Dominican Republic.
So how was he apprehended in Spain?
In Spain, well, my understanding is that he was boarding a flight to Istanbul on a British passport. That's what's out there. I haven't got cast iron confirmation of that from anybody that knows him, but that's my understanding. He was apprehended. Up until that point, I think he'd been posting stuff on social media that gave local sleuths a bit of a clue as to where he was. There was one story that he left a bottle of a specific type of mineral water on a table, which somebody went, "Oh, that's only available in this store near Barcelona." So they kind of tracked it down. And he wasn't very careful. He gave sort of pictures of the sort of beachfront behind him. Wouldn't take a lot of working out where he was. And I think gradually the net closed in. And I think people were probably watching him for a while. And in fact, the last few weeks when I was speaking to him, he was getting increasingly tense.
So what was his morale like?
John's morale was always pretty good. He was always full of life force. I mean, we did have moments where he was pretty angry and tense. And I always sensed there was stuff going on in the background. And we did have falling outs between us about the business side of things. And in fact, he bailed from the original project because they wouldn't pay him in crypto. But in general, his broad morale was always, I'll get out of this situation. You know, our plan was the book would come out, he would promote it, and we'd walk off into the sunset, buddies, and all that stuff. And that was what we planned. And up until when he was in prison, that was still the plan. So I thought his morale was always very good, and I always thought he thought he was getting out of the position he was in.
So do you think he was Epstein then?
At the time, I felt I would be very surprised if John commits suicide. It didn't make sense to me. His father committed suicide. I knew that suicide was a big thing in the family. I knew that it was a sort of a touchy subject for him. At the time, I couldn't really make it add up. As time has passed since, I'm not sure. I wonder whether John just maybe thought, I can't get out of this. Maybe, 8 months in prison worn him down. He lost a lot of weight. I just don't know. I would like to think there was a sort of bigger conspiracy theory and he was suicided. And he certainly teased that himself. I couldn't be sure. I absolutely couldn't be sure.
Because wouldn't he, a man of his spirit, have tried his luck in the system rather than, terminate his life?
Yeah, maybe that there is an argument to that side, but I think he knew what the system was. I mean, you just need to look at Julian Assange or somebody like that. I mean, with the best will in the world, you can be the ultimate rebel, the ultimate sort of renegade, but the system crushes you no matter who you are in certain circumstances. And I think John knew that. I mean, just the idea, as I said earlier, of going back into some sort of faceless gray prison where he just couldn't sort of do the sniping that he was doing from hiding. I just think he thought maybe I couldn't do that. That's just me theorizing, but that's the feeling I have.
So we've just got a few minutes left, and
Yeah.
I've put in the chat if people have got any questions for you. So Easy E has asked, did John give the Democrats free computers?
The Democrats, the US Democrats? No, not that I know of.
Okay. Linda Net has asked, John was said to have bizarre fetishes. Any knowledges of this? We've got to be careful with YouTube community guidelines on stuff like this.
Fine. Yeah, that went out. To be fair, it's not something it went out in that Showtime documentary. There was the sort of talk about the fetishes and the hammocks and stuff. Never really talked about it. He did say that he took drugs a lot when he had sex and enhanced sex. Never really touched on the fetishes. I think that was hype.
JL has said after his death, there was a letter posted to his social media account. What did that mean and who did it come from? Yeah,
definitely not John. I saw the queue, didn't buy into it at the time. John told me many occasions he never once accessed that Instagram account. The only thing I would say is that a lot of people surrounded John. There was a sort of quite a wide net of sort of various hangers-on. I'm not denigrating these people at all, but there was a wide net. Libertarian Party people, various people that were involved in crypto. Could have been anyone.
Ash has asked, were you surprised that John made it out of Belize alive?
Not at all. At that time, John was faking heart attacks and strokes left and right. This guy knew how to get out of situations. He used a government official in Guatemala. John knew how to make moves. And from an early age, he knew how to make moves. And that's one of the things that makes me wonder about how he didn't think he could have perhaps made moves in prison in the US or wherever. But yeah, he was always going to get out of Belize and Guatemala, and he did it pretty spectacularly.
What was your last communication with him?
Last communication was, it's actually not directly with him. My last communication was through his wife, Janice, where we were talking about the book. I told him it was finished, that it was coming out, etc., etc. And the message came back from John that he was really looking forward to reading it, and he was going to give it a promote when it came out on social media.
And we've just put the link in the chat, and all of your links will be in the description box below this video. Is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers, like where they can find you, support you?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm on Twitter. That's my main thing at Mark Eglinton. I'm on the other social media platform, Getter, at the same handle. All my stuff's on Amazon. The book comes out in the UK tomorrow, actually. So if you're up for trying to find it, it'll be out there on Amazon. And I think, even people who aren't massive McAfee fans or don't know about his life, you will leave this book learning something new about life. He was a great philosopher, if nothing else.
Well, look, this is fascinating. I think we've only scratched the surface. We'd love to do a more in-depth interview with you at some point if you're up for that.
Absolutely. Love talking to you. And you're right. We're skimming the surface, and it was a mad life that lasted a lot of years, and anytime.